management. And I want to talk to you guys about some of the things that we do that I think are special and interesting. You've probably seen lots of centralized management tools, and I want to talk to you guys about some of the cool ways that we can make the life easier of somebody who's actually a practitioner that utilizes our product. So, first and foremost, what is it in terms of Panorama? Panorama is our centralized management tool. It allows us to do management at scale. We've got customers that are running hundreds to thousands of firewalls through one single UI. It gives you centralized management capabilities. It gives you centralized visibility across all those firewalls that are deployed, as well as simplifies operations, understanding health and monitoring of those particular systems. Whether those firewalls are deployed on-prem, data center, virtualized firewalls, as was just talked about by Varun. Again, all of those can be managed from a single UI that's actually able to do pretty much everything that you would ever do with a firewall. One important aspect, which I'm not going to highlight through the rest of the presentation or the demo, is that our user interface that you're going to see is literally identical to what you're going to see on the local firewall. And we use that strategy, which is quite nice, so that if a company starts off with 3 firewalls and they don't have Panorama, and then they move to it later, your user interactions are virtually identical. Cool? So I'm going to cover a couple specific concepts before I go into the demo, so that you guys will have the context of what I'm actually showing you. First things first, I want to talk about our security rule base, and I'm going to talk through that. I'm going to walk you guys through it. We're going to create a rule live. Some things that I think are important is the fact that we bring a couple things directly into the rule base. Number one, our rules are they read like business logic. So when the security admin gets told that the marketing team is going to start utilizing some tool called Twitter, what does that look like? Is there homework that they have to do? Do they need to go look up ports? Do they not need to go do that? How do they make that policy follow the marketing team, regardless of people coming in and out of the group? We need to make sure that those policies are dynamic from that perspective. And it needs to be inspected, right? We need to make sure that we inspect it for threats, sandboxing technologies, the things that Nir was describing. All those things need to come together in a single security rule base. You're not having to go configure this in 5 different screens to actually bring what I just described to life. It needs to read like business policy, and it needs to be something that you guys can see. And I'm going to show you guys what that looks like, okay? Beyond that, I want to talk about something that we actually have a patent on, but is really, really powerful and important for what we do from a product perspective. It's called dynamic address groups. And so what it is the capability for us to describe essentially a set of IP addresses, an address group that you would traditionally have in a security product, but it's described in essentially a way that's like metadata, essentially. So you can say that a group of IP addresses are described in an address group, not by you manually going and adding that into your policy, but actually by a set of tags. Now, the original use case for this was actually integrating with virtualized VMs and resource management, things like ESXi, but it's actually been utilized in many different ways, and you're actually going to hear more about that through Demisto and our integrations there at the later demonstration. Right? But what does it mean? How does it work? And then I'll show you guys how this actually gets configured on Panorama. So what it means is if I define a set of criteria that says my New York web servers are defined by any IP address that gets registered into the system via an API call or through a direct integration with something like ESXi or with Demisto, which is our automation tool that we offer, if they make a call into us that says this IP address has this metadata, which is configured through either an external person who's managing ESXi as an example, or through Demisto through a correlation or a workbook that they've discovered or deployed, then that comes in directly. This IP address gets added automatically, and there's no human interaction at that point. It just takes place. That enforcement just changes immediately for that IP address and actually puts it in an address group. So if you spun up a new virtual machine, now the firewall knows about it, and no one has to do anything as long as those tags and those attributes were registered with our system, that it was a New York web server that was Linux in this case, right? And the other cool part about this is that if anybody ever removes an IP address or I guess let's say brings down a VM, most people don't go update their policies. This thing does it for you automatically, right? And I'll show you guys how this all works and how those integrations look like on the product. The other one that I want to talk about real quick, and then we'll show you all this stuff, is something called external dynamic lists. A very similar concept, slightly different. This is really primarily about getting feeds and a list or a group of indicators into our system so that we can immediately start enforcing policy without, again, having to update. So we have got examples of IP lists URL lists or just domains themselves. What we do is we tell our firewalls to go reach out to wherever you host this information, essentially flat files. They can be protected, they can be encrypted, we can head off on them, but you can then pull that information into the firewall. You create a security policy that lives there, and by default, we will reach out and update this on a periodic basis that you define, however often you want. So the great part about this is at scale, I can bring in hundreds or thousands of indicators. We can use them for blocking. We can use them for allowing. It depends on whatever your use case is, but a very powerful use case for us that I think is somewhat unique in terms of how you would run security products. The last thing is kind of a lead in and a plug. I'm going to show you guys the user interface. I'm going to show you some of our visualization tools. One of the things that I'm going to show you, you will have no idea that it's actually happening, is that all the data that I'm going to show you is coming from our firewalls, being sent into what we call the Cortex data lake, which is actually my current day job. I actually run this today. I used to run Panorama. And then you're going to hear all about Cortex after me in the very next section. But Panorama, which I'm going to show you, is actually connected into this cloud-based log collection service that we're able to offer here. So without further ado, let's see this darn thing happen. Any questions in the meantime? Make sense?
I just had one question.
Please.
About when you said the policy is updated automatically when the IP address goes down. Could you just clarify that specifically? Is that mean like when you've removed that device manually, or if it just goes offline, or?
So it depends. So essentially, from the security product perspective, someone has to tell me. So if you're in the virtualization world, right, and you spin up a VM, and that VM gets registered through ESXi, through a direct integration with our firewall, and says this VM has been deployed.
Yeah.
It has the following tags that you've added.
Yeah.
Then that comes into me, and I know how to add it to that address group. So the security policy that I'm going to show you how it gets created is going to be able to actually automatically enforce or allow, enforce from a negative or allow in terms of a positive for that VM to have access to what it needs to. So if it's a web server and it needs access to the database, we can control that automatically. Same thing in reverse. So the question being that if they spin down a VM, it unregisters because those tags and that IP address are no longer registered to that IP address, and it automatically updates that dynamic address group, and things take place naturally behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think
How do you handle
misunderstood what you said earlier. No, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
How do you handle tag collisions?
Tag collisions.
Yeah, like you have ESXi, I have a tag that I put in there and it represents PCI DSS type things, for example. And then in another system, I have a tag that represents a non-PCI DSS, but it's the same tag ID.
I see. So
now I have a massive collision and a potential massive audit issue.
Understood. So we
And findable, by the way.
Right, understood. So there, you define the match criteria itself. So you could say, like if someone typoed or selected the wrong tag, if you have several different pieces of match criteria so that they would have to select many, many different ones for it to be wrong, you can show that. And I'll show you what that match criteria looks like. We actually learned that through an integration with ESXi. I'm not sure from an ESXi perspective if they allow you to have the exact same name.
Well, ESXi is not the problem because vCenter manages all the tags. But let's say I have a high trust or I have Demisto and I'm using different tagging mechanisms. There's no central repository of what a tag means.
Right.
Now I can have tag collisions.
Sure.
Which could cause my firewalls to allow all sorts of traffic that should never happen. Now I have a massive threat vector because of all the collisions. I was hoping maybe Panorama took care of tag collisions and managing that.
So from a tag collision perspective, we will have a set of tags that we accept and we understand, and we'll create the match criteria itself. But if we get a legitimate API call that says that this IP address has the following tags, then we're going to enforce that as defined. We won't know, we don't have the context outside of the world that says that someone had a tag collision in that perspective. The thing that you can do from a best practice perspective is to try to use more than a single tag as an example, to try to give you, more to avoid that. Now, the other things that you'll learn about is kind of the other things that we can do on the cloud side with behavioral analytics. So perhaps if a bunch of traffic was suddenly allowed that should not be allowed, some of the analytics that you're going to hear about with Cortex are ways that, we can help discover that something anomalous is happening through things like Cortex XDR analytics that you'll hear about next. But it's not something that we currently natively do as part of Panorama, if that makes sense.
You guys need I would suggest you guys have a tag repository and definitions so that you have a unified set of tags everywhere. Because without a unified set of tags, even detection is way too late.
Right.
You only need 30 seconds or less to really do a breach.
Sure.
And if I allow a breach because I have tag problems, I don't have a defined set of what all the tags actually mean.
Understood. Okay.
And from where which systems should be able to set them, what they actually mean range-wise.
Fair. Okay.
An interesting concept.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So let's while we're on the subject, let's show what it looks like to kind of do some of these things. And quick plug before I switch to the demo. The demo. So I wanted to start off here. This is kind of one of our centralized visibility tools. It's called the ACC. It used to stand for Application Command Center, which is about essentially how our system was able to kind of what got us into the door for most customers was that we had application awareness on the firewall, right? And so one of the things that's really cool here is we're able to actually interact with this. This is a live dashboard, essentially. We're gathering all this data, again, on that cloud solution called Cortex Data Lake. We're able to pivot, ask interesting questions, see utilization, learn about particular applications. I can see quickly what applications are, who's using those applications. I can drill in, I can pivot, all kinds of fun things when it comes to visualization tools. Again, you're going to hear more about where this data resides and other things that we do with this data. But I always like to start off here because it just kind of talks about the visibility you get natively out of the box if you just have one of our firewalls, let alone if you have Panorama. But now I want to get to the dynamic address groups. I want to talk about essentially how those things are utilized. So the example that I've been talking about is virtualization and kind of that aspect. But these can be used in other ways as well, for good or evil or any other ways. But the idea is that I can actually define a dynamic address group by essentially tags, as I described. You can add match criteria. Any particular tag that we either manually configure as a user, you can configure your own tags, or that we learn through vCenter, as an example. Those are all available in this UI for me to add as match criteria. So I can quickly say and or add whatever match criteria I want to actually define how this dynamic address group, what would lead to a match in this case, right? An API call comes in, it matches here, and life basically would put you into the membership of this address group. Now, that's a powerful thing. But I also mentioned these external dynamic lists. So this is in the product where it lives. You're able to create your own external dynamic lists. You define whether or not it's an IP list, it's a domain list, or it's one of our lists, meaning the Palo Alto Networks actually offers a set of indicator lists that are natively out of the box for our customers that you can utilize from a best practice directly in policy. So this says, okay, maybe I want to make an exception to an IP address. You're able to do that even with our predefined ones through this particular product and user interface with exceptions and all that kind of fun stuff. This is also where you figure out how quickly you want to have those updates take place, whether it's within a few minutes. We've actually been able to have some customers utilize this for things like simple use case. Customer opens a ticket, or one of your end customers opens a ticket and says, I need to get to this website. Currently, it's being blocked because it's called gaming, and you guys block gaming, but I should be allowed. And so they want an exception. So today, for a lot of organizations and a lot of products, what has to happen is someone opens a ticket, has to go make a change, update the URL filtering engine, and wait for a change window to go push that thing out. With this solution, I can simply have a list that lives on wherever you want it to live, and even in SharePoint or something like that, just a list of exceptions that says ca.lottery or lottery.ca when it's $1 billion for the lottery. Turns out a bunch of people want to get to that website even though it's considered gambling, right? And so you might want to make an exception for that because people want to know whether they have to come into work the next day, right? So those are some of those products there, right? I want to now get into the rule base and talk about some of the things that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to create a rule, and we're going to say allow marketing to tweet, right? That's what we talked about earlier, so let's do it live. We'll say, cool, let's tag it just for fun, for organizational purposes. I have to actually spell, which is unfortunate. And so now what I'm going to do is come in here and say, okay, who do I want to allow? Well, I don't want to worry about IP addresses, right? I want to allow marketing I don't care what IP address you're at, whether you're VPN or not. I don't really care. Perhaps I say, maybe I just want to say, if you're coming in from, let's say, VPN or you're in the trust zone, I want to allow you to have access to tweet. But what user do I want to allow? I said I want to allow marketing. So we integrate with LDAP and things like that. So this is an LDAP group for marketing. Awesome. Directly integrates directly into the policy base. So now I say, okay, there's a bunch of other stuff you can do here, but I want to focus on this use case. And I say, where do I want to go? I want to say untrust, which is the internet in my example, if this was a web gateway, right? And so now I say, well, cool. You said you wanted to do Twitter. Well, Twitter in our world is an application, right? You can control some really cool things when it comes to Twitter. Like, do I want to allow them to post, to edit, to upload documents, right? Or do I just want to say they can do everything? Well, this is my marketing group. Perhaps I say you can do everything. But what's key here is I don't have to go research what ports they're running on, what's actually happening, what URLs they're going to. I don't care. It's an app. It needs to work. It needs to work for my business. And I say, cool. So I select that app. From here, the other part I talked about is service port, right? 443, most likely. Maybe it's non-standard. I don't really know. Do I want to research that? I sure don't. I'd rather have Palo Alto Networks research that for me and just make sure that this app works for my marketing team. So I choose application default, which is our default, right? And so now I can say, now what do I want to do? Well, I want to allow it. But guess what? I want to not just trust. I want to also inspect. So now I want to say, let me add some more. I want to actually make sure that there's no viruses that are known. So I'm going to say, add a default network-based AV profile on here. In addition to that, I want to say, from a vulnerability protection perspective, I want strict vuln protection, right? I want to make sure that no one's trying to do an exploit through a Twitter link or something like that. And then I want to say anti-spyware. So if I happen to see any command and control that Palo Alto Networks knows about, great, I'll add that. And we'll say strict, because why not? And then from a URL filtering perspective, I can just say alert all. You can also be very custom. If you want to do star.twitter.com, you could be very specific here if you chose to. In this case, I'll just leave it as default for argument's sake. One of the other things I think is important is the capability in a single security base, security rule base, to be able to do things like maybe within this same exact use case, I want my marketing team to be able to tweet as much as they need to, but I don't see any reason for them to be able to download any executables. Like, why would anyone need to download an executable from Twitter in my marketing team? Perhaps there's other use cases. Maybe you guys share things like that, but perhaps you shouldn't either. But that's another story altogether. So let's say block executables. All right, let's just say exe. What I'm able to do, again, here is say block. Let's say PEs. I say any application. We know it's Twitter in this case, but I can reuse this profile in other places. In this case, I want to say add PE, which is a portable executable. Let's say DMG for Mac folks, right? I just add that, and I could pick 50 other different file types here. Now, what's important here is, again, I'm not worried about what port, what app, whatever. I'm just saying that these things right now, directionally uploaded or downloaded. In this case, I don't want him to upload any EXEs, and I just want to say block. Cool.
How do you know what file type is being used? So those are easy to hide.
So there's different things, right?
Are you doing actual inspection of the file, its physical file size?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of our decoders are based. So the bread and butter of what brought Palo Alto Networks to the table, which we do a lot of things here that are awesome, and you guys need to understand all of those. But again, our bread and butter was Palo Alto Networks firewall. And we are able to do, with our decoders, with our App ID engine, we used to call it the single pass engine, which is still the same thing. Every single flow goes through this engine. We're able to inspect every file transfer that takes place. We're able to discover, based on, even if it's zipped, we can unzip and unzip and unzip and unzip and unzip to discover what the actual file is, and then pass those through our decoders as well to discover whether or not it was a PE or someone trying to hide a PE within a screensaver, right? We have all those capabilities built in natively to our system as part of the firewall itself, right?
For your application section, you had the different things for Twitter, like post and things like that. Did you have to build those manually, or is that something you've already got set up that says, hey, we work with Twitter to know those? Okay.
Absolutely. So we have an entire research team right over here that their entire job in life is to understand applications and bring those to you as a security practitioner. So that if I want to just know what, like Slack, I just want to say Slack. Cool. Well, what does Slack do? Does a bunch of different things. And so they work on understanding these applications and updating these app IDs. So what we can do is bring content updates automatically to our firewalls. This is, again, something that just natively is part of what our ecosystem does. Like those vulnerability signatures or those AV signatures or even the decoders to know what a file is are updated through what we call content. So regularly, our firewall contacts us and says, what is the latest and greatest content package that you guys have to offer to understand what app's functionality there is? You get an email every week that says, hey, Slack added this new cool feature called blah, blah. And you can decide as a security practitioner, do I allow that or do I not allow that? And you get to control that.
How soon is that built out, though? I mean, let's say Slack puts that out. I mean, are you guys working with Slack directly to say, hey, we know we're going to put out that feature. Let's send that out to our customers like 24 hours before or something like that?
Right. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no.
Okay.
To be totally blunt with you,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. We don't have relationships with everybody in the whole world, right?
Gotcha.
Some people specifically don't have relationships with us, but we have to respond to our enterprise customers. I think we spend a lot of time working with app vendors as much as we can because we can get PCAPs and things like that. We also have a whole test suite that's trying to make sure that things don't break. And so if suddenly something doesn't work, we also learn about that. We also use a lot of different applications inside the building, and so we get to learn about them not working as well because we have a great security team that locks things down.
So when you talk about Slack and being able to change features within it, are you talking about actual built-in features or integrations or both?
Built-in features. So if Slack offers let's say Slack comes out with some net new feature that I don't know. Slack, you can message and now you can call. Let's say Slack call was a new feature,
right,
as an example. By default, if it's just seen as Slack base, and we get requests from a customer, as an example, that says, I actually really want to control that because I don't want people doing Slack call. I want them to use Zoom because I pay Zoom. Great. Then what we'll do, either we'll just learn natively, or someone will call us and say, hey, can you make sure this control is there through a feature request? And essentially we update our app engine and boom, there's a new feature within Zoom that allows it. Now, in this example, what I did is I picked Twitter as what I call a container app. So if you were all in with Slack, and that's what you want your organization just to be able to do, and they add a new feature, and let's say it uses some new port that you don't even know about, right? We will update the content. It will just work. You don't even touch your policy because you're an all-in Slack user or Twitter, user, right? And then it just works. And so it depends on the particular functionality.
So you need to look into the encrypted channels, right? Because
Right.
I mean, Twitter is running over HTTPS.
Correct.
So that means that you're breaking it up and putting it back together.
Correct. Yeah, and it depends on the application. In some cases, if I pick Twitter or Slack, a lot of these are encrypted solutions, and so yes, that would require decryption to take place for those solutions to be effective.
Well, what if
now, real quick, I want to point out that if you don't decrypt, we still know it's Twitter. I just can't control posting versus, uploading in that case, right? And then, so you can still have control on that level of whether I allow the application of Twitter or not. I have granular control.
All right, so what if I'm all in on
APNS.
Yeah.
For that?
Apple Network Services,
Right.
notification service, you just allow or disallow.
Right. Well, and even if the customer is doing decryption, there's an actual decryption, a built-in don't decrypt list that we know we can't decrypt because they use, let's say, mutual auth or something like that.
APNS.
Exactly. So there's certain things like that where it's just that you can't. There's certain industry solutions that you can't do unless you're on the endpoint, as an example, which we have, which is another story for another day.
So the default behavior for when the new features come out. So Twitter has a new feature come out. If you've checked Twitter, good, everything below it goes. But if you are granular, then the new feature is
off by default, right?
Okay.
But that's important, and so we actually spend a lot of time, and there's a couple of the features that I didn't exactly cover, and of course I'm going to get kicked off the stage here soon. But I want to try to point out quickly. One of the things that we work on is a way to make that easier, right? So we actually let you know of new app IDs, which is a big problem for a lot of customers. Is if something was seen as let's say just SSL, and tomorrow it becomes app foo, and you don't have a policy that allows that foo, but people have been using it in your organization, that's a big problem, right? Because tomorrow it just shuts off, right? And so we have basically we changed our actual update sequence. So we normally do it I think it's the third Wednesday or Tuesday of every month, not on Patch Tuesday, but the next one or something like that. We send out email alerts about 3 weeks ahead with all the new app IDs that are coming out. And you can say, don't turn on new app IDs by default. Because I don't have time to deal with this right now, and there's some emergency going on, and I can't break my because I'm dealing with, let's say, a breach or something. Great, turn it off by default, and life goes on. So these are features that are out there. The last thing I want to quickly put a plug from, and I'll take your question after that, is this other thing that happens all the time, which is a super important user-friendly feature that we just launched, which is awesome. It allows us to actually, let's say you get a request from an app developer, right, that says, open up these ports, and it needs to work. Ready between these two servers, and what app is it? I have no idea. It's my app, or it's something I don't care. I don't know what it is. What we'll do is we'll actually sense what the traffic is showing you, and it shows you directly in the rule. So you write the rule, you open the ports, right? We discover what the actual app IDs are that we're seeing, and then with one click, you can update that policy and only allow those apps to run, even if it's just SSL web browsing and, let's say, some API call, right? We can control that. And I'm going to get kicked off, but I'll take your last question.
Yeah, so let's say you're all in on Slack, but you're not in on Twitter, and you're using the Twitter integration in Slack.
Yeah.
What happens?
Twitter would not work.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to validate.
Yeah.